Minecraft has a storage problem. Luckily, there are two crazy powerful storage mods that have been mainstays in most mod packs for years, starting with Applied Energistics 2 in 2013 and Refined Storage shortly after in 2016. The problem is, for years, the modded community has been at odds trying to decide which storage mod is best. Today, we finally answer that question once and for all. Welcome back to Mod Labs, where we take mods and put them to the test by diving into new features, discovering new tips, tricks, and most importantly, having some fun along the way. In the next 60 minutes, we'll run through both AE2 and RS and compare them over 8 different criteria, including base system setup, storage types, ingredients, and much more. Then at the end, we'll average all 8 scores together to declare a storage mod winner. Both of these mods have so much to offer, so we better jump straight into it. Also, I just want to leave a quick note at the beginning of the video here to reinforce that the goal of this video is to be educational and fun. Everyone has their own opinions, and both mods have their pros and cons. It's totally okay to have your preference, and a little teasing is valid, but let's keep it civilized. I've posted and highlighted one comment for each mod in the comment section, so you can like and voice your support for your favorite of the two. At their core, AE2 and RS are actually extremely similar, and both are classified as digital storage mods. This means that instead of being stuck using hundreds of chests or shulker boxes, you can store and manage massive inventories inside a condensed, searchable system. Both mods allow you to scale massive storage networks, move items around extremely quickly or even wirelessly, automate crafting, and much more. However, the way each mod goes about it is slightly different. In general, AE2 is the veteran, extremely powerful with tons of features, but also slightly more complex. Refined Storage, on the other hand, is a little newer to the scene, which still provides loads of similar functionality to AE2, but in a simpler and more intuitive user experience. Let's start at what I call a base setup, which is kind of like the minimum set of items needed to make a functional storage system for each mod. There are 5 pieces that make up a minimum digital storage system. The first is a controller, which you can think of as the brain of the entire network. AE2 and RS both have a controller block, which look pretty similar. They both take power to operate, and once connected, you get a nice animated colorful texture. On the Refined Storage side, for each storage network, you can have one and only one controller block. However, on the AE2 side, you could technically get away with a simple network without an ME controller. However, you can also have as many controllers as you want, requiring that they're all connected together. This means that you can make some pretty cool multi-block creations, kind of like this cool looking cube that I normally make. There are a couple reasons why you may want to make a larger controller that we'll get into later, but for a base system, only one is needed. The second item is what will actually store all the data for the items that we put into storage. Of course, to make things nice and confusing, each mod calls them something slightly different, but their core function is the same. AE2 calls them cells, and RS calls them disks. To make it easy, I'm just gonna refer to both as drives, or at least I'll try to. Don't be surprised if I use all 3 words interchangeably throughout the video. I have an example of a drive from each mod here. We'll cover how these drives work and the types and uses for each mod in one of the later sections. But for our base system, just think of this as a massive portable chest that will store all of the items inside of it. However, we can't access these drives on their own, so we need the rest of the storage system to import and export items. That's where our third item comes into place, a block that stores our drives so our system can access them. Both mods have a drive block that looks extremely similar and has storage for up to 8 or 10 drives. Sticking with their naming convention, AE2 calls its block the ME drive, so we'll put our ME cell inside. And now we see that that drive has been populated. RS calls its block the disk drive, and again, when we put in our RS disk, we can see it's visually populated. However, we still don't have a way to actually get inside the drives yet. That leads to our fourth block, which is kind of like a monitor that will allow us to visually access our storage system. Let's start on the RS side, which calls its monitors grids, and it has 3 types. The first is just a grid, which when placed looks kind of like a massive chest, except with a very important search bar at the top, as well as some buttons for additional configuration on the left. The second grid type is a crafting grid, which is basically an upgraded version of the normal grid, with the main difference being that the UI now includes a crafting table. The third grid is a pattern grid, which kind of looks like the crafting grid, but with some different options on the side. We'll cover this one more in the auto-crafting section coming up later. Switching to the AE2 side, AE2 calls its monitors terminals and has 4 types. Unlike the RS grids, which are full blocks, the AE2 terminals are more like panels that attach directly to AE2 cables. The first is the ME terminal, which is pretty much the equivalent of the RS grid. The second is the crafting terminal, which is pretty much the same as the RS crafting grid. The third is the pattern encoding terminal, which, you guessed it, is pretty much the same as the RS pattern grid. However, the fourth is something a little new called the pattern access terminal. Right now without power, it doesn't show a whole lot, but again, we'll cover this terminal in the auto-crafting section later. Because the AE2 terminals do not take up full blocks, AE2 also adds facade blocks, which allow you to essentially cover the gaps and make the terminals look like a full block. Any item with the block tag will have an associated cable facade that can be crafted so you can make your terminals blend in pretty much perfectly with whatever your base design requires. Now we have all our pieces to make a base storage system, but we're still missing one thing. We need to connect it all together. So our fifth block is the cable. We'll cover the details of all the cables later in the connectivity section, but for now, we'll take the base cables from each mod, which for RS is just called cable. We'll go ahead and connect our controller to our disk drive, which we'll now see is powered, and our drive that we placed earlier lights up. Additionally, we'll connect the cables to each of our grids, which also light up once connected to the network. Hey, Future Reese here. Hope you've been enjoying this video so far. If so, maybe consider subscribing. I would really appreciate it. In fact, based on my channel statistics, less than 0.5% of the people watching this video are subscribed. So come on, help me out a little bit, and let's see if we can get that up to 10%, or at least 1%. On the AE2 side, we'll get the base cable, which is called a Fluix ME glass cable. Again, when we connect our controller to our ME drive, we'll see our storage cell lights up, and our terminals, which we actually put on Fluix cables earlier, also light up once active. If you're feeling fancy, both mods allow you to dye the cables or monitors to match your base color scheme if you want. You can craft the cables with the dyes in order to change their color, and these colored cables can attach to the base cables. However, two different colored cables cannot attach to each other. This is the same both on the RS side as well as on the AE2 side. For RS, you can also color the grids either by crafting or even shift right clicking with a dye. On the AE2 side, the terminal actually automatically takes the color of whatever color cable it is attached to. So if we instead change our cable over to blue and replace the terminal, we'll see that our terminal now takes that same blue color. So that's 5 pieces, which means we've done it. We've built our first networks. Both mods' core functions work exactly the same, but just for this example, I'll use AE2. We'll click our fancy diamond button here and put some diamonds into our terminals, and we'll see that they show up similar to a chest, except with the very important piece that they will stack to over 64. Additionally, if we have multiple items in our network, we can see them in the inventory, and when we have larger amounts of items, we can use the search bar at the top to filter out items based on whatever we type. And of course, in the crafting terminal, we can use the crafting table to directly craft things using the items in our network. If we go to our drive storage, we'll see that all of our items we put in the terminal are stored as bytes on our storage cell. So if we take out the storage cell and look in our terminal, none of our items are there anymore. But of course, as soon as we put the drive back, our items reappear. That covers the basics on how a digital storage mod works, but trust me, both of these mods have so much more in store, pun intended. So let's take a look at the first place they differ, and spoiler alert, we don't have to go far to find the first instance. Both AE2 and RS have a pretty large selection of different drives that store items or even fluids, and much more. Let's start with the RS drives, or disks, which I guess are a little bit more simple. To craft any RS disk, you need 2 items, a storage housing and a storage part. In RS, the storage part not only defines the capacity of the disk, but also the type of storage. In the base mod, there are 8 storage parts, 4 regular storage parts which are used for items and range from the lowest size being 1K to 4K, 16K, and the largest size 64K. Additionally, there are equivalent storage parts for storing fluids, except instead of the size being measured in items, the size is measured in buckets. Following the same color scheme, the components go from the smallest of 64 buckets to 256 buckets, 1024 buckets, and the largest 4096 buckets. Each of these components are recursive crafts of their predecessor, which means to craft 1 of the yellow parts, you need 3 of the orange parts. And also to craft 1 of the green parts, you would need 3 of the yellow parts. However, because each part tier increase multiplies the storage size by 4, This makes it more efficient to use larger sized drives than just using a large amount of smaller drives. Unlike the storage parts, the second piece to make a disk, the storage housing, is the same for all types of disk. So regardless of if we're trying to use a item storage part or a fluid storage part, we make the same storage housing and craft them together to make our disk. I'll take 2 example disks and put them inside our drive over here. When we hover over each drive, it shows the amount it is filled and its capacity. So for our 4K storage disk, we can store up to 4,096 items. Now the drives actually have little lights on the front that tell you a little bit about their capacity status. So when active, the light at the front is blue, but as we start to fill up the drive, once we get to 75% of a full capacity, the light turns yellow. And once we completely fill the drive, then the light will turn red. Of course, once we have filled the disk with the full 4,096 items, we can no longer put more items into our system until we insert a new item drive with available space. Storing fluids in our fluid disk is slightly different, but still pretty easy. For instance, if we have a water bucket, we can right-click inside our grid and it will store the water inside the disk while leaving the bucket for us to continue using. Or if we want to take fluid out of the grid, we can left-click with a bucket on the fluid to take it out. This not only works with buckets, but also with other tanks from other mods such as the mechanism tank that has a little bit of a larger capacity. While the base refined storage mod has some nice flexibility with the 8 disks, there are some other add-on mods available such as mechanism integration that adds chemical storage parts to craft chemical storage disks. This is useful for storing the different mechanism chemicals directly in your RS system. Also, the add-on mod Extra Storage adds even larger size components to allow you to store more items and fluids, with the max being this item disk that has space for over 16 million items, as well as this fluid disk with space for over 1 million buckets. Time to move over to the AE2 side. Overall, the cells now. AE2 cells work in the same way that the RS disks work. You still need 2 pieces to craft any cell, except now called a cell housing and a storage component. The first difference is that for AE2, the storage component is what determines a cell's size, and the cell housing is what determines the cell storage type. So looking first at the storage components, we have a range from 1K, 4K, 16K, 64K, which is all the same as RS, but AE2 also has a 5th component that's even larger, being 256K. And now, similar to RS, we craft this component with the housing to make the drive. But because there's only one type of storage component, we can make either an item cell housing to make our component into a cell storing items, or a fluid cell housing to make our component store fluids. Additionally, AE2 also adds what's called portable storage cells that can be crafted with any component or cell housing type. That's basically like a little mini storage system on the go, allowing you to directly access a chest-like network just by right-clicking the item. However, this does require that you give the cell some power. Now, like our test with RS, let's put in a 4K item and a 4K fluid drive into our ME drive. Unlike RS drives, AE2 drives not only have a size capacity, but also a type capacity. This means for any cell, regardless of size, you can only have 63 different types of items. This stems from an old NBT data issue, which could actually corrupt your world if too much data was stored in a single block. However, nowadays, this type restriction is mostly a way to prevent performance issues, as well as encourage some more strategic storage management. Now, to make up for this type restriction, in terms of capacity, these drives store way more items than their RS counterpart. So unlike our 4K RS drive, which could store 4,096 items, the 4K AE2 cell stores 4,096 bytes, where 8 items equals 1 byte. So that means a 4K AE2 cell could store 8 times the items of an RS 4K cell with 32,768 items. AE2 cells have a similar light system showing blue when active, but instead they have a yellow light if you have maxed out your amount of types of items, and the same red light once the drive capacity is completely full. Now, one of the pros with AE2 being around for so long is that it also has a lot more add-on mods that allow a large amount of additional drives. I have some examples in this chest here. The first and probably the most important is from AE2 Things, which adds an ME disk housing, which allows you to make AE2 cells with the same storage components that do not have a type limit, basically making them equivalent to RS drives, except with compatibility to AE2. Definitely can be pretty helpful if instead of trying to store store a mass amount of similar items, you may want a storage system that you can kind of just dump a bunch of random stuff into. Additionally, there are add-on mods that add storage cells for things like mechanism chemicals, sourced from Rs, or even power storage cells with RF and FE, as well as some portable storage cells to go along with those new types. Extended AE adds a couple cool cells like an ME void cell, which you can partition to set certain items that if input into your AE system will automatically be deleted, as well as infinity cobblestone and infinity water cells, which add an infinite amount of both of these effective infinite items anyways to avoid additional drive clutter. And like RS, AE2 also has an add-on called Mega Cells that adds even higher level components, allowing you to craft up to 256 million bytes of storage for items, fluids, chemicals, and source. We'll cover even more about the add-ons that are available for both AE2 and RS later in the video, and of course there are always new add-ons being developed, so in general if there's something you're looking for, there probably is an add-on for it. But the add-ons needed for the drives I've shown so far are what I would call the base set of add-ons you'll find in most mainstream packs where either AE2 or RS are included. Now that we've looked at how we store the items, let's go ahead and drive over to our next section. It's time to look at all the different ways you can connect your storage systems either together or even to interface with other blocks or machines added by other mods. Starting with RS, we already looked at the cables earlier, and again, RS only has one type of cable. And of course, anything you want to be included in your RS storage network needs to be connected to the rest of the network using these cables. However, along with the cables, RS does have some useful additional blocks that can be used as I/O to your RS system. The first two are the importer and the exporter. As the names imply, these allow you to import and export items or fluids or whatever directly into or out of your RS system. So for instance, if we hook up this importer to this chest here, now whenever we put items into the chest, those items will automatically get taken out and show up in our grid. Additionally, the UI of the importer has a couple filter slots that allow you to add items to either a whitelist or a blacklist to determine what is or isn't imported into the system. The UI also has 4 upgrade slots, which when you hover over, you can see we have a couple different options. The first is we can have up to 4 speed upgrades, which will increase the speed it pulls items out of the attached inventory. A stack upgrade, which you can only have 1 of, but instead changes the importer operation to work a stack at a time instead of an item at a time. And of course, if you're looking for max speed, you can pair 1 stack upgrade with 3 speed upgrades to get some pretty quick transfer rates. For instance, if we hook up an importer to this drawer full of diamonds, you can see how quickly items can be pulled into the system. The last upgrade type is the regulator upgrade, which allows you to set a specific item and a quantity that you want the importer to only import if the amount in the target inventory is more than the value you set. One thing I like to do is set up an importer to an ender chest, so that way anytime I put items into an ender chest anywhere throughout the world, I know that they'll be input directly into my storage system. On the flip side, the exporter exports items from your system into the inventory it's attached. By default, the exporter doesn't do anything, but you can go inside the UI, and once you tell it an item to export, it'll start pushing items out from your system into the target until either the target is full or you run out of items in your RS system. You can again use the regulator upgrade to set the number of items you would like the exporter to attempt to keep stocked in the target inventory, and the speed and stack upgrades to increase the transfer rate similar to the importer. The next item we'll look at is the external storage, which when attached to an inventory will actually show the contents of that inventory in your RS system. That means that you can essentially store items without having to use a disk. So in theory, you could operate a very thin RS network without even needing a disk drive or any disks. This works on pretty much any inventory, but my favorite place to use these is with drawer networks. Here I'll attach an external storage to this storage controller, and now when we look in the grid, we'll see all of the items that are in the drawers in the grid. Additionally, you can set the insert extract priority of the storage bus if you would like the system to pull out items of the external inventory first, or maybe even last. In this case, I want all of my items to go into or out of the storage drawers, so I'll raise the priority. This is a great way to store large amounts of set items without needing to craft a bunch of disks to store them. The next 2 items are the constructor and the destructor, which allow you to place or break physical blocks directly from your system. The destructor is pretty simple and will break whatever block you put in front of it and put it into your system. Like the importer, you do have a whitelist or blacklist filter available inside the UI if you want, as well as spots for speed upgrades to increase the breaking speed, and some fortune upgrades to apply fortune as it breaks blocks equal to the fortune effect that you would get on a pickaxe, as well as a silk touch upgrade to apply a silk touch effect when breaking exactly like a silk touch pickaxe. This can have a lot of great uses, especially for something like a cobblestone generator, where you could place one facing the cobblestone block and boom, Infinite cobblestone. The constructor is the opposite and will place items in the direction that the constructor is facing. Like the exporter, it does nothing by default, but in the UI, if you put a block in the filter slot, it will place a block, assuming you have one in your system. There's also an extra option on the left that you can change if you would rather the constructor drop the item as an entity instead of placing it in the world. Okay, time to get a little bit more technical and switch over to AE2. To save some time, I'll start with the blocks that are the same as RS. Instead of the importer and exporter, AE2 has an input and export bus that both pretty much work the exact same. However, instead of using speed or stack upgrades, AE2 has what's called an acceleration card that exponentially increases the import and export speed. The acceleration cards take a little longer to heat up than the RS stack and speed upgrades, but once it gets going at full speed, it is a little bit quicker. For something like the export bus, by default, there are 18 slots available for whitelisting, but you can increase this even further by adding something called a capacity card, which adds an additional 9 slots per card for up to 63 max slots of filtering. There are some additional cards, the redstone card, which allows your buses to be redstone activated, and fuzzy cards, which provide more filtering options like ignoring MBT data or other data tags. AE2 also has a storage bus that works essentially the same as the RS external storage, but does have a little bit more configuration ability to play around with on the left-hand side, as well as some handy extra add-ons, including a overflow destruction card that will basically work like a void upgrade in a drawer and trash any specified excess items if the target inventory is full, as well as an inverter card to flip the internal whitelist of the storage bus to a blacklist. And instead of destructor constructors, AE2 has annihilation and formation planes that work pretty much the exact same. One difference on the annihilation plane is that instead of having upgrades for Silk Touch or Fortune, the plane itself can be enchanted with things like Efficiency, Fortune, Silk Touch, or any other pickaxe enchantment, even including those that are added by the mod pack you might be playing. Which means for me, with the mod pack that I'm using to record this, I could enchant my annihilation plane with up to Fortune 8 for tons of extra drops, or even this 3x3 break book, which will allow the plane to break 9 blocks at a time instead of just 1. Now that we've covered the stuff that's the same between AE2 and RS, it's time to break into the things that make them different, and this brings us to one of the most controversial things about AE2. That's channels. You can think of channels as paths to the ME controller. Everything you attach to an AE system needs a path to the controller for it to function. And these Fluix cables we've been using by default only have 8 channels, which means if we try to attach a 9th item on the same cable line, we'll see that that 9th item won't become active. AE2 offers an upgraded version of this cable called the Smart Cable, which actually shows the amount of current channels in use using something like Jade, as well as gives you a nice little visual on the cable showing exactly how many channels are in use, and you can kind of follow them to see exactly how each connection is routed. With default AE2 config, both Fluix and Smart cables have up to 8 channels, but this could be changed in the config with a multiplier to allow more channels with the lower tier cables, or if you want to disable channels entirely. For more complex setups that may require more than 8 channels, you can use an upgraded cable called the Dense Cable, which instead has 4 times the amount of channels that the base cables have. In this case, that means 32 channels. While many AE2 items can't connect directly to these dense cables, they do allow you to transfer many channels easier and then split off with your Fluix or Smart cables wherever you need to attach machines. Additionally, each side of the ME controller is another starting point for more channels. So this helps to answer that question earlier on why you may want to make a larger multi-block ME controller if you have the need for lots and lots of channels. As I mentioned, these channels are pretty controversial, and a lot of people get turned off by AE2 because of them. In general, the channels are added to streamline performance and prevent lag. However, they also work as a way to simulate real network limitations and give you an opportunity similar to the drive types to optimize your network and think strategically. I've been using AE2 for years, so to me, thinking with channels comes easy, but I can totally understand how for newer players, these channels may seem pretty complex. And if you're a consistent RS user, then they may seem pretty annoying. My suggestion is, if you're struggling to use them, is to go into the AE2 config and you could try increasing the channel multiplier to give yourself a little bit more leeway on how many channels are available. And if you're really struggling, then just disabling them is always an option as well. At the end of the day, everyone is playing Minecraft to have fun. Hopefully. So no need to bang your head against a wall to learn channels if you really don't want to. On top of all the other cables and stuff we've talked about, AE2 also has a really cool connectivity method called P2P, or point-to-point. P2P can be a little complicated, but at its core, P2P creates a virtual tunnel between 2 points using a single AE2 channel. This allows for efficient, long-distance transportation of all kinds of things, including items, fluids, redstone, light, or even other ME channels. The system works by placing 2 P2P P2P tunnel devices, the first being the input and the second being an output, and then connecting them together with AE2 cables. Then use a memory card and right-click on each tunnel to bind them together. This allows you to set up extremely high bandwidth and complex connections without exceeding the channel limits of AE2 cables. While not necessarily a common or useful case, a way to show the power of P2P channels is this scenario, where I have 16 P2P tunnels. Each tunnel is connected to a dense ME cable with 32 available channels. We can then connect these input tunnels to another 16 output P2P tunnels and connect them using a single dense cable. Now we're effectively transferring 512 channels over a single cable. P2P has tons of amazing uses, including for integration with other mods that may not have drive types, or even for cross-dimensional transfer. For the sake of this video, I'm going to keep explanations about P2P and some of the following auto-crafting and add-on sections at a pretty surface level. But if you're interested in a part 2 covering some of the much more complex parts and uses for AE2 and its add-ons, let me know in the comments. Now, all of these items and features are great to look at and use, but most people are playing modded in survival, so I guess it's also pretty important to look at the resources needed to craft the items we've seen so far. Again, we'll start with RS since it's a little simpler. RS adds 4 of what I'll call base ingredients. These ingredients are added specifically for RS crafting and along with other vanilla materials make up pretty much all of the RS items. The first is quartz enriched iron, which is iron crafted with quartz. The second is quartz enriched copper, which is copper crafted with quartz. The third is processor binding, which you get 8 of crafting 2 string with a slime ball. And last is silicon, which is usually added by other mods as well, but RS has its own version which you can craft multiple ways, including crushing sand or smelting quartz dust. These base items lead into the second level of common crafting ingredients. RS adds 3 processors, a basic processor, improved processor, and advanced processor. Each of these are crafted by smelting its associated raw processor. Those raw processors are crafted with 1 processor binding, a silicon, a redstone, and its identifying item, which for basic processors is iron, for improved it's gold, and for advanced it's diamond. The last common crafting ingredient is the machine casing, which is a bunch of quartz enriched iron and a stone variant. With these 8 items, you can craft pretty much everything in refined storage, but here are a couple early game examples. Most importantly, the controller, which takes an advanced processor, a machine casing, some silicon, and quartz enriched iron. We looked at the storage part components earlier, but looking at them again, you'll see that they are recursively crafted using mostly the different processors going down in tier the closer you get to the lowest level storage component. The crafting grid is crafted with an advanced processor, a crafting table, along with a grid, which again is made with more processors and a machine casing. Same with the drive, which is an advanced processor, a machine casing, along with a chest and quartz enriched iron. The RS cables are extremely cheap, using just the quartz enriched copper and making 12 per craft. And then you can make additional cable components by combining cables with different processors like the importer and the external storage. Now it's time to compare with AE2. Compared to RS, the AE2 crafting definitely has a bit more steps, but again, that sort of balances out some of the more advanced features that AE2 offers. AE2 has a couple different base crafting ingredients, the first being its own version of silicon, which you can craft the same way as refined storage silicon. Next is a special crystal called Certus quartz. In some mod packs you can find this by breaking Certus quartz ore, but I'll cover another way to get it shortly. You can crush Certus quartz to make Certus quartz dust. Certus quartz dust is important because by combining it with glass you can make yet another important crafting item called quartz glass. To make our next ingredient, you're actually going to need to use a machine called the charger, which you can then put Certus quartz crystal inside of, and by using power it'll turn the crystal into charged Certus quartz crystal. The charger is pretty much always the first machine you should make in AE2 because the charged Certus quartz is required to make our next basic ingredient, Fluix crystal. Fluix cannot be found naturally in the world, so the only way to get it, at least early game, is by dropping charged Certus quartz, redstone, and nether quartz into water to make Fluix. There also is a skystone dust, which you get by crushing skystone. So where do we find skystone? AE2 adds a randomly occurring structure called meteorites. These can be found throughout the world and cause quite the damage to surrounding terrain, but are made out of skystone. If you're ever having trouble finding one of these meteorites, you can use an item called the meteorite compass, which always points to the closest meteorite. These meteorites don't only contain skystone, but if we break the skystone to get to the center, we'll see some budding Certus quartz crystals, which is similar to the way amethyst grows. These will be the way that you can farm Certus quartz infinitely. There are a couple different tiers of budding Certus quartz that slowly deteriorate over time, but look out specifically for flawless budding Certus quartz blocks because these never deteriorate and will produce Certus quartz forever. Additionally, there's a block called the Mysterious Cube that if you break will give you some important items as well as a guidebook in case you like to read. I don't. Back to the lab. Almost as if I planned it, the next 4 important items we'll need are those presses, which there are 4 of. A logic press, an engineering press, a calculation press, and last but definitely not least, a silicon press. These are required to make the AE2 processors and can usually only be found in the AE2 meteorites. Many mod packs, especially skyblock packs, will add alternate ways to get these presses and even alternate methods to obtain Certus or skystone. Back to our processors, we use our presses in a machine called the inscriber to make our next ingredients, the printed circuits. Each press has an associated circuit, so by combining the gold with our logic press, we can make a logic circuit. Our engineering press with a diamond will make an engineering circuit. The calculation press with Certus quartz will make a calculation circuit, and the last is the silicon press with a piece of silicon to make printed silicon. Printed silicon is actually the most important because to make any processor, you combine the associated circuit with a piece of redstone and a printed silicon. This allows you to make the logic processor, the engineering processor, and the calculation processor. The last main crafting ingredient that I'll mention are the annihilation and formation cores. These are made using the logic processors, Fluix dust, and Certus quartz for the formation core, or nether quartz for the annihilation core. At this point, we've made pretty much all of the major crafting ingredients. So again, let's take a look at some of the major early game AE2 items. First, the ME controller, which is actually pretty cheap, requiring some skystone, some Fluix, and an engineering processor. And again, we'll take a look at the highest level storage component, which is recursively crafted using the different storage components and processors similar to RS. The crafting terminal recipe is basically the same as RS, requiring a calculation processor, crafting table, and the normal terminal. And the terminal requires the annihilation and formation cores as well as a logic processor, as well as a general panel, which is kind of the base for any of the different terminals added by AE2. The ME drive is extremely cheap, using just the Fluix cables and engineering processors, and the Fluix cables are also relatively cheap, requiring some Fluix crystal as well as quartz fiber, which is made using Certus dust and glass. Storage buses are made using pistons and an ME interface, which is made by combining formation and annihilation cores. Our last 2 main items are important ones that I haven't actually mentioned yet, but are specific to AE2. The first is a crystal resonance generator, which is extremely cheap, but is actually an early game power unit specific for AE. You can have only 1 per network, but when attached to a network, it'll provide up to 20 RF per tick for free, which is just enough power for some early game items before you may have some normal power generation set up. One place this is extremely useful is for the growth accelerator, which is also pretty cheap. This block, when powered through an ME system, will speed up growth ticks to the adjacent blocks. Not only including normal Minecraft plants, but also things like those budding Certus quartz blocks so you can speed up Certus quartz production. And using something like an annihilation plane, you can make early game automation of Certus quartz pretty easy. There is one more crafting ingredient for AE2 that I may as well mention, and that's the Singularity. The Singularity is one of the endgame AE2 items and is made with a new AE2 machine called the Matter Condenser. To make a single Singularity, you feed the Matter Condenser 256,000 of any item that it'll basically eat up to produce. Usually things like cobblestone or water are the best here because making infinite amounts of those items quickly is pretty easy, especially when you get AE2 add-ons involved, like with that Infinity Cobblestone or Infinity Water Cell that we talked about earlier. For both mods, these items are by no means exhaustive, but hopefully at least they give you a good enough idea about what kinds of items and effort it takes to craft some of the most important and most useful items for each mod. It's pretty obvious that RS is simple, but while AE2 catches a pretty bad rap for being a lot more complicated and expensive, I'll let you make your own opinion based on the limited recipes seen here. Additionally, a warning, Many mod packs change a lot of the base recipes for some of the first and second tier items pretty consistently, either for balance or as part of the progression tree within that mod pack. So I would always recommend checking those first couple vital item recipes whenever booting up a pack to see which mod makes the most sense out of the gate. Just because you pick one mod to start your playthrough doesn't mean that's the mod that you'll end your playthrough with. Now it's time to talk about one of my most important features for any storage mod. These storage systems are extremely powerful on their own, but I'm not a huge fan of cables running all over my Minecraft world if I need to have access to my storage system. So that's where the wireless capabilities will shine. Both mods have the ability to not only access your system wirelessly in a grid or terminal, but also the ability to wirelessly transmit connections to your network, which allows you to connect items to your network thousands of blocks away without any cables connecting them. Let's start with RS. RS offers a wireless variant of every grid, which means there is a wireless grid, a wireless crafting grid, and a wireless autocrafting monitor. Each of these need power in order to function, but even with power on their own, they don't do a whole lot. In order to connect these wireless grids to your network, you must use a block called the wireless transmitter. Once placed, you must bind your wireless grid to that transmitter by shift right-clicking on it with the grid. Now when we right-click our wireless grid, we have access to all of our items in our storage system. By default, when active on a network, the transmitter gives a 16 block access range around wherever it's placed. This can be boosted using up to 4 range upgrades. Each one increases the range by 8 blocks, but also increases the power requirement to keep the transmitter active. But even with maxed out range upgrades, 48 blocks just doesn't feel like enough. This is where add-on mods come to the rescue. This time being RS Infinity Booster, which adds 2 higher tier upgrades. The first is the Infinity Range Booster, which, as the name alludes, takes that 48 block range and instead makes it infinite so you can access your system anywhere in the world. But of course takes much more power to keep functioning. And if even that isn't enough for you, then you can use the Dimensional Upgrade, which not only gives you infinite access anywhere in the overworld, but anywhere in any Minecraft dimension. Now that we're blasting our network out into the airwaves, it's probably a good time to look at security. RS adds a security manager block, which when placed on your network restricts access to other players by default. You can use something called a security card to set certain permissions for specific players to either allow or disallow things like inserting, extracting items, autocrafting, and more. Wireless grids are great and all, but for scenarios where we may want to access our storage network with blocks, such as grids or importers or exporters, other places in the world, we have to use a set of new blocks called the network transmitter and receiver. These items are aptly named because they either transmit or receive networks. We can connect our wireless transmitter to our storage system, and we'll place our wireless receiver over here where we want access with this grid. And nothing happens. That's because we have to bind these two together using a network card. Now when we right-click our receiver and place the network card in our transmitter, we'll see that the transmitter turns blue, showing it's active, and our grid by the receiver lights up and gives us full access to the network. The transmitter takes power to operate just like the wireless transmitter and will scale directly with the distance between your transmitter and receiver. Overall, AE2 wireless access works in a similar way, except with some different names. First, default AE2 offers both a wireless terminal and a wireless crafting terminal. Additionally, a common add-on mod not only adds the other 2 wireless terminals in the pattern encoding and pattern access wireless terminals, but also a wireless universal terminal, which allows you to craft all of your wireless terminals together to have access to all of them in a single item. You connect these terminals to the network by using a wireless access point. And to link your terminal, you put it in the slot on the right. Similar to AE2, the default range is 16 blocks, and you can upgrade this using range boosters. The range boosters exponentially increase both the range and energy usage, but unlike RS, which can only use 4, AE2 allows a full stack of boosters with a max range of 528 blocks. There's also a way to extend this range infinitely across dimensions as well by using a quantum bridge card. But unlike RS, this card doesn't go in our access point. Instead, it goes in our terminal, which opens up a new slot that we need to figure out what fills it. Like the network transmitter and receiver, AE2 adds a way to wirelessly access your network anywhere in the world. Except instead of a single block, you have to make a multi-block called the quantum link chamber. This is made with 8 ME quantum rings around 1 ME quantum link chamber. When we connect this multi-block to our network, we'll see some cool animation showing it's active. Now we'll go to where we want to wirelessly connect our terminal, where we can build a second quantum link chamber. To link these, we'll need what's called a quantum entangled singularity. To make this, you take one of those singularities singularity items we talked about earlier and blow it up along with an ender pearl. This turns your one singularity into two linked quantum entangled singularities. Now you can link any two quantum linked chambers together by putting one entangled singularity in each. Additionally, this entangled singularity is what our wireless terminals use with that quantum bridge card. This allows our wireless terminal to access the quantum link anywhere in any dimension, and also removes our need for that wireless access point, which our quantum link chamber basically replaces. Before we get into some of the crazy, more endgame stuff like autocrafting and intense add-ons, I think it makes sense to go ahead and check out some features that are unique to AE2. Before we looked at storage cells that could store all types of things like items, fluids, and more. But AE2 also adds a system that can store your Minecraft builds. This is called spatial storage. Similar to the normal cells, there are special spatial storage components which are crafted recursively, except in 3 tiers: a 2 cube tier, 16 cube tier, and a 128 cube tier. Then you can combine these storage components with an item storage housing to make your spatial storage cells. If you use your geometry brain, these cell names actually tell you exactly what they do. The 2 cube cell will store a 2 by 2 by 2 block space. The 16 cube cell will store a space up to 16 by 16 by 16 blocks. And you guessed it, the max tier 128 cube tier cell has enough volume to hold up to a 128 by 128 by 128 block area. That's over 2 million blocks stored within a single item. To use these drives, we need a couple special blocks. The first is the spatial I/O port. This is the item you use to save and reload your blocks into a spatial storage drive. The second is spatial pylons, which you can use to outline the space that you want to save in the drive, or alternatively outline the space where you want to place down the contents inside of a drive. Here I've outlined a small 8 by 8 by 4 space with the pylons. You must have all 3 sides outlined with pylons and then connected together with the Fluix cable. Because this space is larger than 2 by 2 by 2, we can't use the 2 cube cell, but we can still use the 16 cube cell even though our area is a little smaller. Once we connect our pylons to the network, they turn from red to purple, showing that they're active. Now in our spatial I/O port, we can see the size our pylons are outlining, as well as the required power for a single operation, along with a power efficiency based on our selection size. I'll go ahead and put in our spatial drive in the I/O port. Now we have a very stylish mini house, and if we give our I/O port a redstone pulse, bye-bye house. Inside our I/O port, we'll see our spatial storage drive has moved to the right. It now has a serial number assigned and shows the storage space size. Now if I build another set of spatial pylons on the other end of our test chamber, we can set a spatial I/O port and put our spatial drive back in. Give it a redstone signal, and hey, look, our house is back. You can get extremely creative with these spatial storages, and this is really just a teaser. But if you've been paying attention to some of my other mod lab videos, then you may or may not have noticed that my main lab space is actually a massive spatial storage playground that allows me to swap out my lab floor with whatever I want. Like this setup from my Create video, the tier list from my Auratech video, or of course the most important, a reminder to check out ACLAs and use code MCTC for 20% off any server hosting. One more feature exclusive to AE2, if you have an extremely large network spanning large areas of your world, you may start to encounter issues where part of your network unloads if you get far enough away. While this can be solved with mods like F2E chunks, AE2 adds a block called the Spatial Anchor that when attached to a network will chunk load every chunk in which that network is included. It does this at the cost of power, and that power cost increases exponentially as the number of loaded chunks increases. It also has this fancy little UI button that will highlight all of the chunks that it's forced loading. If you're like me and play some crazy expert mod packs, or are just lazy, then automation is something that becomes extremely important. Both mods add items and systems that allow you to not only automate crafting recipes, but all kinds of things, including interfacing with other mods. But these automation setups can get pretty complex pretty quick, especially AE2. Unfortunately, I am also very quickly approaching my 1 hour time limit, so here's the deal. I'm gonna do a speed run just quickly identifying some of the main automation items from each mod. And if you guys are interested in another video going much deeper into the endgame AE2 items and mega crafting setups, including those with add-ons such as extended AE, then let me know in the comments. The backbone of autocrafting in both mods are patterns, which both mods finally agree on naming the same thing. These patterns are what you store recipes in to tell your machines what resources are required to make the item you're trying to autocraft. Remember all the way back to when we were looking at the monitors? Well, this is where those finally come into play, allowing you to save normal crafting table recipes, smithing table recipes, stone cutting recipes, and the last are processing, which are kind of like a wildcard pattern that allows you to specify the input items and the output items on your own, and then it's up to your machines to do all that work in the middle. Next up, both mods add a block called the interface, which allows you to either input items directly into your system or to allow you to stock specific items inside the interface. These are similar to the import-export buses we looked at earlier, but the main difference being that the interface itself has a capacity which sometimes has better compatibility with pipes or machines from other mods. Next up, we need something to put those patterns in. AE2 has a block called the pattern provider, which you can put up to 9 patterns in to have them interact with things outside of your storage system. They push the ingredients defined in your pattern to adjacent inventories. RS has a block called the Autocrafter, which also allows for up to 9 patterns, and again will attempt to input any required resources defined by the pattern into adjacent connected machines. Patterns don't just work on their own though. We need a computer that, kind of like a real computer, has 2 important parts, including a short-term storage that stores all the required ingredients for the main recipe and any required sub-recipes, as well as computing power to execute one or multiple patterns at the same time. AE2 starts with a general crafting unit that can be combined with any of the storage components you use for the drive to make a resulting unit that has that amount of storage. For example, the smallest being a 1K crafting storage and the largest being a 256K crafting storage. RS instead has recipes to directly craft an item storage block, which, while is less crafting steps, does mean that once you craft a crafting storage, you can't later upgrade it to a higher tier and instead have to make a whole new block from scratch. Additionally, RS crafting storage are typed like their components, so not only are there item storage blocks like this max size 64K block, but also fluid storage blocks like this 4096 bucket block, which would be needed if your patterns had any fluids in the recipes. AE2 also has 2 additional blocks you can craft for the crafting unit called the co-processing unit, which basically provides another thread for your computer to execute multiple tasks in parallel, increasing overall crafting speed. You could add multiple of these to your computer to drastically decrease execution times. Also, AE2 adds a crafting monitor, which when connected to a computer will show a visual of the current item that computer is crafting. Computers from both mods are assembled as multi-blocks and require at least 1 storage block. These multi-blocks must be in either a square or cube to assemble properly. And if you want to use a computer for a large recipe, you must have enough storage capacity to hold all of the items at one time to craft it, which means for large multi-step crafts, you'll likely need multiple storage blocks to have enough space. With large networks, you'll probably end up with patterns attached to all kinds of machines in lots of locations. So both mods add a monitor that allows you to access all of the pattern providers or autocrafters attached to your network in one place. AE2 adds the pattern access terminal, which we looked at earlier, as well as its wireless variant, and RS has the autocrafter manager. Next up, if autocrafting isn't good enough for you, you can even automate the autocrafting. First, the crafting card, which is an item that can be used in either the ME interface, the export bus, or the item we'll look at next to automatically request autocrafting of items you specify. The level emitter is that item that also allows for the crafting card, and when attached to your network can be set to monitor for a certain quantity of a specific item, so that you can configure the system to output redstone when you're running out of a certain item to perform a crafting task. RS has similar items in the autocrafting upgrade as well as the detector. 2 more AE specific items are the molecular assembler, which is the main auto-crafting executor that executes normal crafting recipes when attached to a pattern provider. These can be upgraded with acceleration cards to execute 3x3 crafting recipes extremely quickly, as well as the cell workbench, which allows you to partition drives in order to only be able to store certain items or blacklist certain items, which can be very helpful with automation or capping specific items so things that you have automated don't completely fill your storage system. Now, we've covered the main items added as part of the base mods, but add-ons have become a huge piece to enhance autocrafting even more, either by adding increased capacity, increased upgradability, compacting setups, or even some just quality of life perks. So hey, I guess that leads us to our last criteria. Home stretch here, and we've actually covered a good amount of the add-ons already, so this will be a quick one. As I mentioned earlier, because AE2 has been around for a lot longer and is generally considered the more complex mod between the two, there are a lot more add-ons available for it as opposed to RS. But that doesn't mean that there aren't some great add-ons for RS that help enhance its functionality. However, first we need to start with probably my favorite add-on for AE, and that's AE2 Things. This is the add-on that we looked at in the drive section that adds ME disks that, although have lower overall capacity, remove the type limitations of the base base AE drives. A close second is Extended AE, which adds a whole bunch of new items and functionality. The most important are extended versions of the pattern provider and molecular assemblers that we covered in the autocrafting section. Unlike the normal 9 patterns that the pattern provider can hold, the extended pattern provider has space for up to 36 patterns, and the extended molecular assembler has 8 crafting tables that can execute in parallel as opposed to just the one of the normal molecular assembler. There are also extended versions of the inscriber, charger, interface, I/O port, import-export buses, and even an extended ME drive. Extended AE also has 2 items called the circuit slicer and the crystal assembler, which allow you to make different AE2 processors extremely easily and quickly to help scale your autocrafting in later stages of the game. To craft most things with extended AE2, you actually can use this new material called Entro crystals, which you farm similar to Certus quartz. Entro is also used to make a new processor type called the concurrent processor. Switching to the RS side, there's a mod called Extra Storage, which not only adds a larger storage component that allows you to get up to 16.3 million items stored in a single cell, but also the associated item and fluid crafting cells for your auto-crafting computers. There's also higher tier auto-crafters that give you more pattern slots and increased execution speed, with the max being a netherite auto-crafter with space for 81 patterns and a base speed of 125 times the normal auto-crafter. Back to AE, some quick other available add-ons are the ME Requester, which adds a all-in-one block that allows you to set items and quantities to attempt to keep in stock at all times, and with the ability to set batch sizes, which is very helpful for base crafting ingredients like the AE2 processors, or even things like stone or glass. And last, but certainly not least, is Advanced AE. This add-on is crazy, and honestly I'm still working on figuring out the full power of this one. This adds another processor type called the quantum processor that is crafted using quantum alloy, which uses 4 singularities. So that gives you a little bit of an idea about the power of this mod. One of the most useful items is the ME throughput monitor, which allows you to track not only the amount of items currently in your system, but also the rate at which those items are entering or leaving your system in a configurable per tick, per second, or per minute cycle, which of course can be extremely helpful to see if your farms or generators are keeping up with your automation. Advanced AE also adds advanced patterns, which gives you an insane amount of configurability and control with your patterns, including things like controlling specific orders or block face inputs for specific items in your patterns, as well as quantum armor, which honestly might be the most powerful and best armor I've seen in modded Minecraft. And lastly, why make a normal crafting computer when you could make a quantum computer? The quantum computer is an upgraded version of the normal crafting unit that allows you to run an unlimited amount of crafting tasks in parallel, assuming you have the crafting storage for it. There are new crafter blocks added like the 128 and 256 million computer storage blocks, the data entangler, which multiplies your storage and coprocessor values by 4, a computer accelerator, which adds 8 coprocessors in a single block, and even a multi-threader that multiplies your coprocessor core amount by 8. So needless to say, once you have the resources and ability to craft and power a quantum computer, you can make some insanely fast and complex creations. All of this just scratches the surface for what these add-on mods can do, and I'm sure there's even more creative and innovative add-ons coming soon. So like I mentioned earlier, if you're interested in a separate video that covers all the add-ons and anything new in much more detail, definitely leave a comment and let me know. Whew, we did it. That was a whole lot of information, so I'm pretty impressed if you made it to the end in one viewing, or honestly even in multiple viewings. Before we get to the final result, I want to go ahead and say a huge thank you for all the support on ModLab so far. It's been so awesome seeing so much interest, and of course I have a whole bunch of ideas for new videos that I'm sure you guys are gonna love. I also have enabled YouTube members, so if you're interested, definitely check that out for some exclusive perks like early access to videos, badges, emotes, subscriber server access, and much more coming soon. Now, let's get to the reason why most people clicked on this video. The final scores for AE2 and RS to finally, once and for all, determine an undebatable winner. Over each criteria, I've given each mod a score that takes into account its features, ability, as well as its ease of use. I'll also note, because I will admit I do have a slight bias towards AE2 since I've been using that mod for years, I went ahead and subtracted 1 point overall to help keep it even and fair. So here we go, drum roll please. The final scores are a tie. But But seriously, my final take is, if you want a system that just works with a clean experience and high flexibility right out of the box, refined storage is the way to go. But if you're looking for technical depth and scalability for larger and more complex setups, AE2 should be your go-to. AE2 does offer a suite of more endgame features that RS just simply doesn't, but depending on what kinds of things you're doing in your Minecraft world, this may or may not matter to you. I guess you could say that both AE2 and RS are pretty nice mods.